Welcome to another edition of Life, Love, and Philosophy. This is the sixth in a series of programs I'm doing on loneliness and what famous thinkers in philosophy, psychology, literature, and religion have said about it. In my last program, I dealt with the question, how best to deal with our feelings of loneliness. And I mentioned that so many of the great thinkers suggest that we accept a certain amount of loneliness as being inevitable. Perhaps none of us ever completely overcomes his loneliness. Also, we should give up as illusion the idea that one's wife or children or mother or father can completely eliminate loneliness from one's life. Is it possible that many marriages fail because people have unrealistic expectations about marriage, and that one of the unrealistic expectations, perhaps some people have, is that marriage will completely eliminate loneliness from one's life? Indeed, a marriage gone bad can actually increase one's loneliness. The great thinkers, in telling us what we might do to deal with our loneliness, also recommend that we use loneliness as a learning experience, an opportunity for self-knowledge. Hermann Hesse, Nobel Prize-winning writer, put it this way: loneliness is the way by which destiny endeavors to lead man to himself. Again, loneliness is the way by which destiny endeavors to lead man to himself. How so? Well, the idea is that loneliness can lead to introspection, and introspection can result in new awarenesses. Sociologist Clark Moustakis, in his wonderful book entitled Lonliness, put it this way: loneliness brings into awareness new dimensions of the self, new beauty, new power for human compassion. In our loneliness, we can grow in empathy and compassion. In our loneliness, we can perceive the vulnerability of all people. For example, we are all going to die. We are all vulnerable to sickness and accident. All of our most intimate relationships are characterized by anxiety as well as by satisfaction. In so many ways, we are all in the same boat. Again, Clark Moustakis, the sociologist I referred to before, put it this way: loneliness paves the way to healing, to true compassion, to intimate bonds with all living creatures. How so? Well, I think the example of Buddhist and Christian monks can be instructive here. This has been said about monks, at least monks who are leading, ideally, the kind of life they should be leading. Again, a monk is a man who is separate from all, but in harmony with all. If we are going to reduce our loneliness in life, it's also important that we learn to enjoy our own company. Indeed, we can double our pleasure in living if we can do that. The idea is, yes, we can enjoy the companionship of others, but also, again, if we can enjoy our own company, life will have a much sweeter flavor. The idea is that when we are alone, if we can get ourselves into a state of flow, whereby we even forget that we are alone, then being alone can be a very satisfying experience. So much depends on interests, which we can enjoy when we are alone. For example, reading, music, cooking, working with one's hands. To be alone doesn't necessarily mean that one will be lonely. Indeed, I've pointed out in past programs that there are times when we can be more lonely when with others than when alone. Indeed, I suspect many people have experienced loneliness at parties, loneliness at family gatherings. Thoreau put it this way: I find it wholesome to be alone the greater part of the time. We are, for the most part, more lonely when we go abroad among men than when we stay in our own chambers. How so? Thoreau went on to explain. What sort of space is that which separates a man from his fellows and makes him solitary? I have found that no exertion of the legs brings two minds much nearer to one another. We know that all relationships are imperfect. Psychiatrist Anthony Storr, in his very fine book entitled Solitude, said that because all relationships are imperfect, we all need other sources of fulfillment. Here are psychiatrist Anthony Storr's own words. Even the closest relationship is bound to have flaws and disadvantages. And it is often because people will not accept this that they are more unhappy than they need be. If it is accepted that there is no such thing as an ideal relationship, then it is easier for people to understand that men and women need other sources of fulfillment in addition to relationships. In other words, the idea is we need interests apart from relationships. Psychologist Daniel Goleman, in his very fine book called Social Intelligence, reminds us that loneliness has little or nothing to do with how many social contacts we have in a given day or how much time we spend alone. What matters, according to this psychologist, is this: the quality of our social interactions. The quality of our social interactions, their warmth or emotional distance, their supportiveness or negativity. The idea is that the social butterfly may be a very lonely person, whereas the Buddhist monk, the Christian monk, who spends most of his day alone, but who feels a deep spiritual connection to people, and whose few interactions with others each day are characterized by kindness and compassion, may experience very little loneliness. Again, psychiatrist Anthony Storr, he says this: the capacity to be alone is an aspect of emotional maturity. Again, the capacity to be alone is an aspect of emotional maturity. Perhaps the happiest people are those who can enjoy their own company, but also alternate solitude with reaching out to other people, a smile, an act of kindness, service to others. Self-absorption can increase our loneliness, whereas concern for others can dramatically reduce our loneliness. I myself like the idea of withdrawing from people and then returning from people. I think the arts can also help us to deal with our loneliness. Outstanding plays, movies, books, paintings, for example. Tennessee Williams, the famous playwright, provides some illumination here, I think. He said this: if the sorrow and confusion and longing in a person's heart can be eloquently expressed in art, I think it gives comfort by making the person feel less lonely. William's remarks are somewhat reminiscent of Aristotle. Aristotle claimed that tragedy is the highest form of drama. Why so? Well, Aristotle believed that in watching a very good tragic performance, a play, for example, one could experience a catharsis, and that this can be so important to living a fulfilling life. Perhaps the best way to reduce one's loneliness is to be a happiness giver. I have never felt lonely in life when I felt I was of service or was being of service to other people. Which brings me to my own experiences with loneliness. Like all people, I do experience loneliness at times. But I consider myself to be very lucky because I usually can enjoy being alone very much. Perhaps that's because I enjoy reading and thinking and writing. I love quietude and solitude. I have found the more time I am alone, the more tranquil and joyful I am, and the more compassionate I am. And when I come together with other people, the less angry and hateful and more loving I like to feel I am. In other words, I think solitude has a tranquilizing effect on me. Again, I like the idea of withdrawing from people and returning to people. We need people, and we need to get away from people. We need conversation, but we also need silence. I have never felt lonely when with happiness givers, and I always feel lonely when with happiness stealers. For some reason, I find that being at airports makes me more introspective. That's right, airports seem to make me more introspective. When I travel, I often arrive at the airport very early. And after going through security and checking in my luggage, I generally read a newspaper. And then after reading the newspaper, I look around at the hundreds of people at the airport, at least the people in my line of vision, so to speak. And I begin to dwell on the concept of decency percentiles. We are all familiar with SAT percentiles. Well, let me, for a moment, zero in on decency percentiles. I wonder, when I'm at the airport, who might be the most decent, kind person? Again, as I look around at the hundreds of people waiting to board their planes. I wonder who might be in the 99th percentile of decency. I also wonder, as I look around, who might be the most evil person, who might be in the lowest decency percentile. And then, invariably, I begin to wonder where I might fit in. I begin to wonder what might be my decency percentile. And I wonder if I might sometimes overrate my integrity. I'm reminded that Freud, Jesus, and Buddha all claimed that we often lie to ourselves and often think we are more moral than we really are. I also wonder, again, as I look around at the hundreds of people at the airport waiting to board their planes, I wonder who among them might be the greatest happiness giver, and who among them might be the greatest happiness stealer. Then I think about how insignificant are SAT percentiles and IQ test scores compared to one's decency percentile. And of course, human decency and kindness cannot be certified by academic degrees. Again, human decency and kindness cannot be certified by academic degrees. I have little doubt that if we were to talk with the presidents of Harvard and Yale, they could not look us in the eye and deny that these great universities have graduated some of the sleaziest business people, politicians, and educators. That's not to say that Harvard and Yale have also produced some people of outstanding character who have made great contributions to society. One of the advantages of being able to enjoy one's own company is that one can be more selective in searching for companionship. Psychiatrist Anthony Storr has talked about creative people and the need of creative people for solitude. And he says this, again, I'm quoting psychiatrist Anthony Storr. Nearly all kinds of creative people in adult life show some avoidance of other people and some need of solitude. I think Albert Einstein, the great scientist and mathematician, Albert Einstein is a good example of this. In his autobiography, he wrote the following words: I am truly a lone traveler. I have never belonged to my country, my house, my friends, or even my immediate family with my whole heart. In the face of all these ties, I have never lost a sense of distance and a need for solitude, feelings which increase with the years. One must be able to enjoy solitude if one is going to be a creative person. The writer, the composer, painter, sculptor, teacher, lecturer, all of these people, if they're going to do their best work, must learn to be alone and enjoy being alone. And it is interesting, if the great writers, composers, etc., could not have enjoyed being alone, how much poorer our civilization would be. I mentioned before Anthony Storr, the psychiatrist Anthony Storr, and his great book entitled Solitude, a book I highly recommend to you. In his book, Storr points out that many of the world's greatest thinkers have not reared families and did not form close personal ties. He gives examples: Descartes, Newton, Locke, Pascal, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Wittgenstein, Kierkegaard. None of these men married, and most of them lived alone for the greater part of their lives. Perhaps the most perceptive and honest comments I've ever come across concerning loneliness come from the very famous feminist Elizabeth Cady Stanton, arguably the greatest fighter for women's rights in U.S. history. Her dates: she was born in 1815, died in 1902. She is best remembered for leading the campaign to get women in America the right to vote. You know that for most of American history, women did not have the right to vote. It wasn't until 1920 that American women got the right to vote. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was married, and she had raised several children. In 1892, at the age of 76, in a packed convention in Washington, D.C., Stanton delivered a very famous speech entitled The Solitude of Self. I must warn you, this is powerful stuff. If you can't take too much honesty, I suggest that you switch to another channel. Note, this is a woman who had spent 30 years fighting for women's rights, and who was often ridiculed by men and also by many women who had been conditioned to believe that women should be subservient to men, that women should not have the right to vote. It is sad that Stanton died in 1902, 18 years before women actually got the right to vote. Before giving you Stanton's own words on loneliness, a little more background on her. And this background material is provided by author Vivian Gormack, who has written a very good book on Stanton entitled The Solitude of Self. Stanton, for most of her life, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, for most of her life had believed that making intimate connections with others in relationships was the state of normality, whereas to find oneself alone and isolate, devoid of intimate attachments to others, was a state of abnormality. Now in her 70s, it suddenly flashed on Elizabeth Cady Stanton that loneliness was the norm. Connection was an ideal, the exception, not the rule in human behavior. In other words, she came to the conclusion that loneliness is an inevitable part of the human condition. And now her own words, Elizabeth Cady Stanton's own words. Again, she delivered this speech entitled The Solitude of Self to a packed convention in Washington, D.C. in 1892. Our most bitter disappointments, our brightest hopes and ambitions are known only to ourselves. We ask no sympathy from others in the anxiety and agony of a broken friendship or shattered love. When death sunders our nearest ties, alone we sit in the shadow of our affliction. Amid the greatest triumphs and darkest tragedies of life, we walk alone. Again, amid the greatest triumphs and darkest tragedies of life, we walk alone. Well, is there anything we can all do to reduce loneliness in the world? I think the singer-composer Bob Dylan and the famous novelist Kurt Vonnegut provide some stimulation here. Bob Dylan, in his autobiography entitled Chronicles, which I highly recommend, says that when he was a teenager, his grandmother, who had only one leg, gave him this advice. She said, "Bobby, be kind to everybody you meet in life, because everybody's fighting a very hard battle." And Kurt Vonnegut, in one of his best novels, entitled God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater, has the main character of the book, Mr. Rosewater, giving advice to newborns, to babies who were just born recently. And again, Mr. Rosewater greets the new babies with this advice. "Hello, babies. Welcome to Earth. It's hot in the summer and cold in the winter. At the outside, you'll have about 100 years here on Earth. There's only one rule I know of, babies, and it's this. God damn it, you've got to be kind. I see I have a few minutes remaining, something that rarely happens, something I wish would happen more often, because I wish to remind you that we do have a website, and you can see some of our past programs on our website. Indeed, I think we're up to 10 or 11 of our more than 100 programs, up to 10 or 11 programs now on our website. You can see them, you can hear them, and it will cost you nothing. This is a free website. And again, the website is identified in this way: www.lifeloveandphilosophy.com. Again, www.lifeloveandphilosophy.com. Also, if you wish to contact me, you can email me, and my email address is prpignatelli@gmail.com. And if you email me, you might want to suggest some topics for future programs, or you might even want to suggest some people that you might think would provide for a good interview, because as you know, I also do interviews from time to time. Before I close, I want to again remind you of some excellent books on this subject of loneliness and solitude. A superb book in paperback is entitled Solitude by Anthony Storr. That's Storr, very famous psychiatrist. And a book in sociology entitled Lonliness by sociologist Clark Moustakas. Moustakas, Moustakas. Finally, Henry David Thoreau reminds us that we are all artists. In Walden, he penned the following words: "To affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts."